Hello and welcome to the CanyonChasers garage. Today we'll be talking about what it takes to adjust the chain slack on your motorcycle. Now, adjusting the chain slack on your motorcycle is one of those really important maintenance things that will really help your chain and sprockets last as long as they possibly can. And what's more, it really only takes a few tools and a few moments to really do this. So let's get started. Now let's take a second and talk about what exactly is chain slack. Well, chain slack is how much the chain moves up and down at a point roughly halfway between the front sprocket and the rear sprocket. Now, as you put miles on your motorcycle, the chain actually stretches. The unfortunate thing is, it doesn't exactly stretch at the same rate. So you'll find sections of the chain that have less slack and more slack. These are called tight spots and loose spots. And that's really one of the indicators that let us know if a chain is worn out, if the variance between the tight spots and the loose spots is so great that we can't get a good chain slack measurement. But what we want to do is we want to find the point on the chain where it has the least amount of slack, and that's the point from where we take our chain slack measurements from. Now, this can be done with the motorcycle on the side stand, but a swing arm stand or a center stand makes this task a lot easier. In either case, the first step is going to be the same, and that's simply we just need to loosen the axle. We don't need to take the nut off. We don't need to move the axle out. All we need to do is loosen it so that everything is free to move and rotate. Now we need to take a minute and talk about the importance of keeping the rear wheel perfectly aligned in the swing arm. If the rear wheel gets out of alignment in the swing arm, and say that the wheel is allowed to point a little bit to the left or to the right, that's going to cause the chain to go around a curve or around a bend from the rear sprocket to the front sprocket, which will cause a lot of wear on the chain and a lot of wear on the sprockets. In some worst case scenarios, your chain could be pretty much destroyed over 1,000 miles. You could result in a broken chain. The chain could actually come off the sprockets while you're rolling down the highway, and all sorts of other bad things that we don't want to happen. So we're going to be really careful to make sure our rear wheel is perfectly aligned. Now, there's a couple conventions already on the motorcycle to help make this a little easier, but we're going to show you something else that we use to make sure it's totally spot on. There's a couple different styles of axle carriers used to adjust the chain on a motorcycle. There's this style where your adjusting nut is on the back of the axle, and there's another kind where there's an aluminum block and a lock nut. In either case, the fundamental basics of adjusting the chain are going to be the same. Now, if we think that our axle is pretty much straight and our rear wheel is in alignment, we can keep it in alignment by moving the adjuster nuts on either side of the swing arm at the exact same rate. What we like to do is we'll put our Allen wrench in this case, and we will turn it 1/4 turn on either side of the swing arm together, and that will move the axle together at the same rate, so everything stays in alignment. So how much chain slack should you have? You're going to have to consult your owner's manual to find out what exactly specifically your motorcycle should have. But a typical rule of thumb is between 1 inch and 1.25 inches of slack. So what we do is we take all the slack out of the chain and we measure with a tape measure, and then we push it all the way up. So from the top of the chain to the top of the chain should only move about 1 inch to 1.25 inches, and that's a good amount of slack. Once we have the proper chain slack set at the tightest part of our chain, we want to go through and verify that our axle is properly aligned. Now you'll notice on the back of the swing arm there's these notches to help give us a baseline for alignment. Every motorcycle is going to have some version of this to kind of get things proper. But you'll notice the marks are kind of far apart, and that in this case this plate will actually float a little bit and give you some level of variance. So we need to make sure our axle is totally straight, and the best way to do that is with a tape measure. We need to measure from the center of the axle bolt to the center of the bolt that attaches the swing arm to the frame. And we need to make sure the measurement on both sides is exactly the same. Now, everything pivots from the left side of the rear wheel where the chain is. So if we need to make adjustments to get things back in alignment, we need to make that adjustment on the other side of the wheel. Now, before we can take the measurements on both sides of the swing arm, we need to make sure there is no slack in the system, that the wheel isn't sitting back farther or resting back and not pushed all the way forward. So the easiest way to do that is we take an 8mm Allen wrench and we put it in between the chain and the sprocket, and we roll it back towards the back of the motorcycle. What this does is it makes the chain extremely tight, pulls the front wheel forward, and takes all the slack out. This will ensure that you get the most accurate measurement, which will help you ensure that you get a totally aligned axle. Once our chain slack is correct and we're confident that our rear axle is perfectly aligned, we want to take that 8mm wrench, put it back into the chain, pull it back to make everything tight, and with that chain really tight, now's the point where we actually retighten our rear axle. Again, this will make sure that all of our chain adjusters are pushed all the way forward and everything's snug how it should be. Once the axle is properly torqued down, we want to spin the wheel and make sure it spins freely. We also want to take our tape and we want to measure our slack throughout different points on the chain and make sure our adjustment is correct. A lot of times, especially with older motorcycles, tightening the rear axle flexes the swing arm and makes the chain get tighter. So you may need to back up a step to make sure you get the proper chain adjustment. Finally, it's not a bad idea to double check our work one last time and measure the distance between the swing arm pivot and the axle bolt and verify that both sides are the exact same distance. This will help your chain and sprockets last a whole lot longer. Thanks for watching. Please check out CanyonChasers.net for more videos, product reviews, travel logs, and much, much more.